Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. I have worked on institutionalism now for many, many years. Unfortunately, I'm getting old. So institutionalism has been one of my subjects for the last nearly 3 decades, I would say. I have now, I have here, I prepared, this is a working paper. It's a bit long, perhaps. I will read it. It's, if it's too long, perhaps in the end I will shorten it and I give just a few arguments to conclude the presentation. Now, the title is Natural Law, Legal Positivism, and the Place of Law as Institution. A central topic of jurisprudence, legal theory, and philosophy of law. You can ask at any moment if there is anything it's not clear or whatever, or some even objections. A central topic of jurisprudence, legal theory, and philosophy of law is the controversy and distinction between natural law and legal positivism. This topic is central because what is here at stake is the concept of law, that is, what the law is. An issue that can hardly be skipped by anyone asking for the law to be applied. But why should the conceptual question be of interest to lawyers and students of law and not just remain an issue of idle disputes among philosophers? Why should we engage in considerations and a discussion that does not seem to have a concrete bite on concrete legal problems and cases? Well, first of all, I would like to draw your attention to a special feature of legal practice. This is that the legal practice, aims to, and is often concluded by or deriving in a definition of what the law is, though this is usually done with reference to a particular occasion. People have studied and study law to be able to earn a living by declaring what the law is. But what the law is a matter of controversy. As a matter of fact, the legal case somehow is a fight about what is the law that should be declared to be the law. Moreover, the reality that the law defines is not some piece of material hard reality, somewhat a stone. It is not an item of brute fact, something like a thunderstorm or an earthquake. The reality the law defines is somehow immaterial. In particular, in the law, what the law is, indeed, is what the law should be, ought to be. The law is its normativity. It is made, so to say, of normativity. Now, normativity is not easy to be identified, to be spotted. People somehow need to agree about it. It is not just there, it should be endorsed, so that it depends on what people believe it is. In the end, in the case of law, it partly depends on what we believe and judge law is. Law is without truth, but there is a truth of the law without truth, which indeed is not a matter of decision. It is a matter of discourse. In this way, but perhaps only in this, we could say that the law is self-referential. If this is our phenomenological position in front of law, in the search and fight about its definition, we could now see the controversy about natural law and legal positivism not only as a matter for legal philosopher isolated in ivory towers or in philosophy departments, but also as an issue for the practicing lawyers and courts. Any reading of law is an explanation of law. This is a view confirmed by practice. But then, if law somehow is its definition, a conclusion we could possibly draw is that the law is its philosophy. Law is a philosophy of law. Let me give a short explanation Now this is my first section, natural law and legal positivism. Again, let me give a short explanation or interpretation of the opposition between natural law and legal positivism. We can interpret this distinction in at least three different ways. In a first way, natural law is a body of rules, independent from human will, is contrasted against positive law, the law according to legal positivism, as prescriptions fully dependent on human will. Here the distinction between the two kinds of law is sometimes considered to be equivalent to that between pre-modern and modern law. The modern age, says Hannah Arendt, believes that truth is neither given nor disclosed to, but produced by the human mind. Verum factum, this is Vico's famous formula. We do not passively receive truth, we make it. Truth, thus, could only be predicated of statements concerning entities that we humans are capable to fabricate. Of what we cannot fabricate, we are not able to say any truth. Belief, on the other side, is experienced as will of believing. True somehow is what we believe, and will that is true. Actually, in such perspective, reality itself is a matter of willing. Now, if this is the paradigmatic view of the modern age, then its true law cannot but be positive, the one fabricated by human beings. Accordingly, all true law is made law, and the legal rule to be made is an issue of will and decision. Natural law, then, a law that we cannot produce, or that is not a matter of willing, that we cannot really make a matter of decision, could hardly be a law of modernity. The second way of shaping that distinction is to conceive natural law as a law justified by and valid in a special situation, usually thought of not as historical, but only as hypothetical, the state of nature, while positive law is the body of rules we get produced once we agree, through a social contract, to abandon the state of nature and to enter into a civil state. Historically, in the history of ideas, legal positivism might be seen as deriving by such doctrine. That is, insofar as it stresses contractual deliberation as the constitutional moment of a body politic, has been labeled as contractually. A contract is something that human beings construct, fabricate, or an artificial model that is used to reconstruct and make explicit the normative claims of political institutions. Contractualism, indeed, is a version of a constructivist moral and political theory. The third possibility is that of natural law as a theory that connects legal reasoning with moral reasoning. While legal positivism insists on the self-sufficiency or autonomy of legal reasoning, said in different terms, natural law is a definition of what law is that recurs to some moral concept, while legal positivism is a theory of law that a theory of what law is that claims to be appropriate without any reference to morality. In this second version, it is not so much legal reasoning as rather the definition of law's nature that is related to moral reasoning. It is this third possible view, the one that mostly worries lawyers and jurisprudents. As a matter of fact, some kind of implicit law is acknowledged even by the most ardent defenders of positivism. Here there are, however, radical exceptions that somehow reveal the decisionist core of positivism. For instance, the late Kelsen, against his previous convictions, ends up to deny the validity of implicit logic rules within positive law. But usually lawyers do assume a great range of implicit rules. For instance, the one concerning grammar and linguistic propriety. Elements of implicit law thus are recognized by the bulk of positivists. The serious issue at stake is not so much the implicit nature of some rule, nor either the possible derivation of those rules from a hypothetical social contract, but rather whether in order to give meaning to a rule in a concrete case, we could color it, so to say, by means of moral judgment. The relationship between justice and legal validity is something that is ever present before the lawyer's eyes, and it is here that the contrasting natural law against legal positivism makes a difference for legal practice. Now, this is the second section, and I will introduce category, some list of definitions. Okay, 4 kinds of definition. Usually we have 4 types of definition of law. These are structural, functional, ontological, and normative. A structural definition theory of law is a view of the law according to which the law is to be known or recognized through the form or shape of its components, for instance, through the logical structure of legal rules, and or through the form of the connection of relationship of such components, the one to the other. Paradigmatic of such an approach or definition attempt are Hans Kelsen's view of the legal order as hierarchical structure, Stufenbau, of hypothetical judgments concerning the application of sanctions, and Herbert Hart's theory of the legal system as a combination of rules imposing obligations and of rules ascribing powers, that is, of primary and secondary rules. The former addressed to citizens while the latter asked for officials' compliance. Law would be mainly a structured chain of command or else a pedigree certificate. A functional definition of law is one according to which the law is identified or known through a special function to fulfill or aim to pursue without, however, referring to a moral point of view. Instances of this approach are Carl Welling's theory of law as a sum of law jobs, or Longfuller's view of law as an enterprise of subjecting human conduct to rules, and in general all those theories that conceive law in terms of disputes settling. A definition aiming to ascertain law as a special kind of thing or entity could be labeled as ontological. As instances of such approach, we could mention Joseph Russ's theory of the nature of law, or the various attempts of considering law as an institution, thought as a special dimension of social reality. A normative definition is one according to which the law is identified or recognized through normative criteria, that is, through some kind of ought requirement or evaluative point of view. Here we might distinguish between strong and weak normative definitions. A strong normative definition is the one according to which the law is identified through strong normative criteria, that is, through its correspondence to a complete moral theory which is assumed as already justified or true. In the strong version of the normative definition, the central idea is that at least a few fundamental rules are completely justified through their derivation from first moral principles or basic goods. Not only justified, but even identified. A weak normative definition is the one according to which law is identifiable through a weak normative requirement, that is, through a claim to justice, still to be justified through a complete moral theory. A complete moral theory being first a theory that assumes to be justified, and then a theory that is just, that can offer a substantive solution and a substantive directive without being added any further deliberative moment. For a weak normative definitional approach, it is always meaningful to state a proposition of law as true without having yet confirmed its congruence with moral principles. What is required here is only that the proposition of law could claim to be morally true. For the strong definitional attempt, on the contrary, the moral truth of a proposition of law is a necessary condition of its being disposable or set forth as law. This distinction is quite important, I would say, but I hope it is. So this weak and strong normativity is. Anyway, now let's go to. Let me explain the 3 main perspectives I believe one could take when considering a practice. a social practice. The external point of view deals with regularity and causation. The internal point of view deals with rules, not with regularities, and with meaning and with normativity. We may distinguish between a cognitive and a normative internal point of view. The former does not imply that the one assuming that point of view should adhere to the values that are expressed in the normativity that is considered. The normative internal point of view will, on the contrary, presuppose that those values are assumed by the subject, considering the rules in question. The difference between weak and strong normativity centers around the different types of criticism their respective violation would justify. In the case of weak normativity, there is criticism, but this does not involve an assessment of the integrity of the subject whom their violation is reproached. On the contrary, in the case of strong normativity, criticism implies a reproach against the subject's integrity. Said in different terms, while to criticism on weak normativity could be objected a lack of understanding or training, the same were not believed to be acceptable in the case of criticism within the domain of strong normativity. If I do not speak English properly, I can be criticized because of my lack of education or proper understanding. This, however, does not lead to a criticism of my general character as a person. If I'm criticized because I haven't kept a promise, or if I have stolen something, I will be, on the contrary, questioned not for lack of understanding, but because of moral carelessness. An ultra-external point of view deals with obligations and justifications, that is, with strong normativity. This perspective is not immediately the one assumed through the internal normative point of view. It's not just the belief in the binding force of a rule. It's rather the perspective that we assume once we ask for a justification of the rules that we have taken for granted from the internal normative perspective. It is, in a sense, the philosophical perspective, the one that seeks a foundation for the normative practice in terms of a universalizable principle. I believe there is need for coordination of all these points of view when trying to assess the concept of law. As a matter of fact, lawyers trying to assess the truth of a proposition of law will, in the end, take all of them. We need an external point of view to start our investigation. We need the prima facie, more or less empirical notion of law to put our feet on secure ground, that is, on a concrete area of investigation. A perspective of this kind is involved in the pre-comprehension of the legal phenomenon we have before starting to investigate about its definite features. A pre-interpretive view of law assumes that law is out there and is such that it can be looked at. However, an explicit external point of view will have to go beyond common sense, epistemology, and build an explanatory model open to acceptability and justification and falsification. We need then a cognitive internal point of view to understand what the practice we are dealing with means, to understand its sense. We have, however, to register not only the content of the rules, but also their point. Otherwise, we would not be able to have a grasp of what the action or conduct that is guided by rules is and represents. The being of a practice are its rules, but also the point of the game that is played, that is, of the practice that is carried on by following those rules. It is the institution implemented by following those rules, but also its wits, which is an expression by Wittgenstein, but also its wits, that we might call in a different way, in a different key, its idée directrice. We need to assume a normal internal point of view if we want to act within that practice. Through a cognitive point of view, I understand the practice and its rules, but I do not yet have reason to justify it, or nor do I feel to be bound, obligated by them. I understand them as a possible reason for action, but not yet as actual or valid reason for action to direct my conduct. To make a further step from the meaning and understanding to the justification, possibly obligation, I need to take a normative internal point of view. I have to consider the rules in question correct and justified, and thus as directives that are binding for my action. To fully make this passage from understanding to justification and obligation, the normative internal point of view will require the move to a further perspective location. That is what I would call an ultra-external point of view, which is a counterfactual stance of presupposition, a land of ought, so to say. This might be conceptualized, I believe, as a kind of nowhere, an Archimedean point from which to evaluate what we are required to do by rules in explicit terms. The land of ought here, or the ultra-external point of view, is somehow reached inductively. It is not an exercise of deduction from abstract standards or rational evidences. However, the justification goes beyond a test of fitting of strong normative criteria into the practice of rule following, and will necessarily refer to a strong normative model of justification that has to be found and argued somehow independently from the practice in question. Now, the four types and strategies of definition above introduced could be considered as interwoven with the three above mentioned points of view. We could say that structural definitions belong either to the external point of view or to the internal cognitive point of view, depending on whether they use and base on the notion of a rule or not. If we claim that a rule is a piece of law structure and have of it a notion of a reason of action, for action, we couldn't eschew the conclusion that such rule as reason makes sense and can be grasped only or mainly by an actor within a practice that is from the internal point of view concerning the said practice. We could then say that functional definitions belong either to the external or to the internal point of view, depending on how a function is conceptualized. If it is seen as systemic, intrinsic to the practice, in the causalist sense, the point of view to take will be the external one. An observer could well assert a function so intended just by registering the causal chains of the behavior concerned and their empirical consequences. If, however, such function is seen as the intention pursued by participants in the practice, or the ideal that is involved in such participation, the point of view assumed will be the internal cognitive one. Ontological definitions would belong either to the internal point of view or to the external one, depending on how much practice is needed to conceive the essence of law. The latter could be either derived from observation without asking from the meaning and the effective instantiation of a practice, or it could refer to practice as a necessary condition for the meaning of it. Normative definitions, on the other side, belong either to the internal point of view or to the ultra-external point of view, depending on how much justification is required to be seen as acting under that rule or standard that is referred to by the normative point of view. We could define, for instance, a rule as just a reason without moral implications and nonetheless endowed with sort of binding force, for instance, natural language rules, or as a reason that excludes other reasons and thus having a moral implication, or we could consider rules as reasons that raise a claim to justice, or as reasons that are just insofar as they can derive from a supreme objective standard of justice. To have a full grasp of the complex practice of law, we could plausibly believe that a combination of the three sorts of definition is required. None of them can alone be considered sufficient for explaining law through an appropriate concept. However, saying that we need a combination of the four kinds of definition actually implies recurring to a normative definition with an ontological underpinning, or if you prefer, complementing an ontological definition with some reference to normativity. This seems especially plausible as far as the object to explain and define is law. To explain and define is law, since law raises the claim to be binding both for officials and citizens' behavior. As a matter of fact, a normative definition does not exclude all the other sorts of definitions. It only claims to work as the completion, the final step of the definitional enterprise. Let's take, for instance, Professor Ronald Dworkin's attempt of defining the law. He believes that this could be done by pointing out two special dimensions of the practice of law that is here seen as constructive interpretation. These are two steps in the interpretation and are called, as we know, fit and justification. Fit is the correspondence between our statement of what the practice is in a concrete case, and we'll get it through a functional and a structural definition. In this way, we could have a prima facie statement of what valid law is for that special case. However, fit could still allow for a plurality of true proposition of law for that case. We need to narrow down the scope of it and reach the one right answer that should be, in principle, be our decision. We should thus enter the domain of justification to select among the statements that pass the test of fit, the one that could be successfully proved against the test of justification. To achieve justification, however, a functional or structural definition of law would not be sufficient, though it is necessary. Here we shall need an additional normative approach and definition. We might, however, ask if Dworkin could stop here and should not further refer to a concept of law based on an ontological definition of some kind. He sometimes seems to hint that justification is the final step. This conclusion might be plausibly be challenged once we remember that the justification of the practice can hardly do without inquiring about its sense. Rules and functions are both dependent on sense too. Here an ontological definition is needed, though it cannot merely be just an empirical or a sociological one. We here face the question dealing with the kind of reality a social context of action and social artifacts, like rules or rights, consists of. My contention is that institutionally, once a liberal, so to say, concept of institution is adopted, is a jurisprudential approach that can render justice to the complexity of legal practice and the plurality of possible definitions and points of view. A liberal approach to institution could not stress its ontological distinctive quality without referring to the semantics of sentences used to interpret and reproduce its practical implications for actors. And it would also need a strong normative justification insofar as those practical implications are conceived as testable against standards of correctness or rightness. One of the traditional faults of institutional theory, for instance, the French one, I would say, the traditional French one, also the German, is its monistic methodological approach that stretches beyond any plausibility the relevance of a functional definition. Institutionalism can also very seldom be associated with a pluralist view of society that accepts tension between concept of the good and concept of the right. And this is, I would say, the case of the German institutionalism, or Renard's, Georges Renard's institutionalism. However, the main problem among institutional doctrines is their recurrent temptation of downsizing moral discourse, by replacing it with a self-fixed collective form of life. Beyond this, it is as there were not possible a scope. Beyond this, it is as there were not possible to have scope for a judgment of justice and even for a good life. Such limitation, nonetheless, could be overcome through a larger and more generous notion of institution, where the ontological dimension is not considered able to surreptitiously produce normative sense and justification. So the problem about traditional institutionalism is that ontological definition and normative definition collapse, or from a liberal not in a political sense, but liberal as a genus, morality. From a liberal institutional perspective, this kind, an ontological definition would, on the one side, comprise a structural and functional definition, and it should make use both of rules and goals, at least as methodological tools, which is a problem in the traditional institution. Traditional institution, as you know, does usually is not very keen on having a structural or functional definitions. So ontological definition would make the job, actually, all the job. And it should make use both of rules and goals, at least as a methodological tools. On the other side, it should refer to a strong normative definition. So my contention is institutionalism, on the other side, should refer to a strong normative definition. The latter would be first derived from a reconstruction of the institution as a piece of is, that is, as an outcome of rules that are a piece of ought. The ought of the rules here will not be prescriptive or regulative, but mainly constitutive. Moreover, an institution should have a meaning, a sense, to make the constitutive rule play a coherent role. The sense of the rules is not still fully given either by their linguistic meaning, or by the relationship to other rules, or by their effective compliance. There is a witz, to use again Wittgenstein's expression, that is the point of a game and the corresponding form of life. And this sense of point can be translated into principles and values, or better explained in such terms. Such sense, so the sense of an institution needs a sense. It's not just rules. It's not just there is a sense. And this sense refers to, it's a witz, there is a witz. So there is a point. And this can be translated, articulated in principles. Once this is done, then the road is open to normative justifications and refers to normal justification. Principles as such needs to be justified. Such sense is therefore open to justification. That is again to an odd dimension that this time, however, is equivalent or transparent to the strong normativity of morality. So, see, institution cannot do without strong normativity. This is the point in the end. Yeah? Law thus considers institution both based on constitutive rules and refers to a strong normative sense. The latter consists in the end of a body of principles that is claimed or appealed to in order to give the institution its justification. Here, institutionalism somehow takes distance from a Wittgensteinian approach, according to which forms of life and institutions cannot further tested against higher standards. And this is, the dream of some institution. Institutionalism has historically somehow an authoritarian flavor. There is a smell which is not very good. Doesn't smell very good in different forms. And why? Because of this point. Because they believe, and also the ambition is that you can do without moral discourse and without justification. You stop there. You just say, this is the institution. And it's self-justifying, okay? So in this sense, you could say institutionalism is strongly, usually, communitarianist, and there is a point, a naturalist, I would say, so collapsing the is and ought dimension. So we don't need the ought dimension, since the is also an ought dimension for this. And this explains the vicinity, I would say, of many institutional thinkers with authoritarian political traditions. We shouldn't forget that. So institutionalism was strongly instrumentalized and used in order to support authoritarian regimes in the 20s and 30s. In Germany, in Italy, in France. So that's it's not a noble story. And I'm not saying that institution is it's only this. There is this. So we should. This is the point. This is the problem. There is a problem there. It's of course a political, moral problem, but also I would say methodological and ontological problem. There is something it need to be explained, to be revealed, to be elaborated. Okay. Law thus considers as an institution both based on constitutive rules and refers to a strong normative sense. The latter consists in the end of a body of principles that is claimed or appealed to in order to give the institution its justification. Here institutionalism somehow takes distance from a Wittgensteinian approach, according to which forms of life and institutions cannot further tested against higher standards. An institution so intended is not a final bedrock for action, but can be further tested against the moral theory. It will therefore need both an ontological and a normative definition that have to complement and fit each other. A normative definition alone will not do. I'm not saying that a normative definition alone will do. So a normative definition alone will not do. Institutions are not fully disposable and understandable through principles. And this is perhaps Ronald Dworkin's failure and mistake. Likewise, a mere ontological definition will be short of its definitive and comprehensive sense. Social reality is not able as such to offer us strong normative principles and to be explainable and translated in terms of a complete moral theory. However, law as an institution so intended would allow for a structural and for a functional definition, and for a functional definition too. Structurally, law could be here conceptualized as the combination of constitutive and regulative or prescriptive rules. While morality is a domain of only prescriptive rules, law combines rules that prescribe and direct and sanction human conduct together with constitutive rules that do not prescribe or sanction, but offer new room or scope to human conduct. Seen from this perspective, the specific functional definition would be not so much that of regulating or orienting human conduct, so the specific functional definition in an institution perspective would not be so much that of regulating or orienting human conduct, as rather that of making human conduct possible as an action. Action meaning here a doing that takes place for the sake of its being done. The specific point of the law would thus be that this allows people to act together publicly and so to have a place where they belong and claim rights reciprocally. Law makes possible for public moral reasoning to have a space and as a sense. So this is a very important point, I would say. Usually we think of law as something that has a prescriptive sanctioning. Let's say law is a reduction of complexity. Law is something that serves to direct conduct. Now, in my opinion, this is a mistake, huge mistake. Law is not there to prescribe, mainly to prescribe human conduct, but is there to make human conduct possible, to give human conduct a room for action. By doing this, of course, then there is a prescriptive function. Once we have the football game, then we can have the prescriptions about the limitations and prohibitions about the playing of the players. And we can have, so to say, crimes or fouls and so on and so on. But we should have first the game. If we don't have the game, there is no point in having rules prescripting or prohibiting anything within the game. So the law is there mainly and first of all to establish the game. We have a game, and the game is we are together. We build together a sensible, meaningful social life. We have a meaningful social life, and this is law. Once we have this, of course, and we need, of course, sanctions, prohibitions, and whatever you like. But constitutive rules are, so to say, phenomenologically prior to regulatory rules. And this makes the sense of the institution and the law not the one of reducing the complexity of action, but the one of enlarging the complexity of action. So by law, we don't have less causes of action, fewer causes of action, fewer ways of acting. We have more. So in this sense, for instance, Luhmann theory cannot be accepted because Luhmann, reduction of complexity. Law is a reduction of law is not reduction of complexity. It's just exactly the same. It's adding complexity, making complexity possible. Because we act through complexity. Our social lives is a matter of complexity. Okay? Of course, this paradigm is very strong. Let's say the reduction complexity paradigm is the prevalent paradigm in the legal theory. So I would say 99% of legal theories believe that law is reduction of complexity. In this, I do not believe it, and I think the real point of institutionalism is that institution shows, I think, that this is a mistake. Okay? So it's, in this sense, a new paradigm, you could say. Perhaps I'm exaggerating, but there is a shift, a huge shift of perspective. Now, I believe the institution may offer us a solution to the controversy between natural law and legal positivism. So, this is the original question. To explain how I think this is possible, a recent debate within legal positivism should be shortly summed up. And it's a bit too long, but I hope I'm not. Am I boring? It's too long? Mm-hmm. Okay. Within legal positivism, there has developed a confrontation between two modes of conceiving the separation between law and morality that is seen as the defining mark of such a differential approach. According to exclusive legal positivism, morality can never play any role in assessing what the law is. So Joseph Raz, the definition of law does not need any reference to morality, nor does it require any sort of legal reasoning. Though moral reasoning is open to lawyers, this will not be specific of their function or practice. The nature of law is fundamentally based on the fact of being authoritative. All other properties are doomed as irrelevant for identifying law as such. The nature of law is not interpretative and therefore is independent of any public awareness about its existence. Our concept of law, this is a quotation by Joseph Raz, does not make an awareness of it in a society a precondition of that society being governed by law. Inclusive legal positivism, on the other side, consists of the thesis that morality can be incorporated into the law and so be instrumental to its recognition, if it is explicitly made part of the rule of recognition. In America, this has been made very popular by Professor Coleman. Said in different terms, positive law could state that morality be one of its own sources. However, and this seems to have been accepted by Herbert Hart in his latest period of production, intellectual production. However, sources do not need to be social facts. They might also be moral principles. In this way, the source thesis, the pillar of positivism, would still hold, and nonetheless, the separation between law and morality would only be a contingent property of the law itself, not its essential and permanent quality. Separation will be now reinterpreted as separability between law and morality. In this soft or negative version, positivism is true. Then, just in case, we can imagine a legal system in which being a principle of morality is not a condition of legality for any norm. That is just as long the idea of a legal system in which moral truth is not a necessary condition of legal validity is not self-contradictory. Within natural law, we also find an opposition of two modes of thinking it. We could use the term inclusive and exclusive also to label the two views that are confronted here. So, on the one side, this inclusive, exclusive terminology has been used to articulate legal positivism in two different camps, so to say. Now, I would say that the same could be, the same inclusive, exclusive could be used to identify two different versions of natural law theories. And this is my proposal. This is not, so inclusive, exclusive, natural law is my terminology. It's not a terminology adopted by natural lawyers themselves. All right? While inclusive and exclusive legal positivism is a terminology adopted, so to say, from the internal point of view, from themselves too. Okay? On the one side, we find an idea as derivable from a supreme. On the one side, we find an ideal of law derivable from a supreme moral principle or from basic or absolute goods without the necessity of a further institutional public procedure to have access and acknowledge them. Substantive immorality would in this perspective be sufficient, at least in specific basic domains of human conduct, to assess the legal invalidity or the illegality of a certain rule of prescription. Natural law, in this sense, excludes the institutional operationalization and recognition of natural law principles. These are able to give us, at least in certain cases, the one right answer we are asked to find in law practice. this is a, exclusive natural law believes that it is possible to define law just in a deductive way. We have specific moral principles, and from these moral principles, we can derive a notion of law, okay? Without any further element. Such exclusivity is radicalized through the denial of conceptual conventionalism. Meanings are reconsidered in terms of essences. A concept here relates directly to its object without the mediation of language and theory conventions. Law as a concept immediately reflects and gives account of the nature of law that is out there independently from the concept. This eventually implies that concept cannot be matter of controversy. Things are there to be exposed and discovered by means of concepts. The latter do not play any special constructive role. As a consequence, legal practice is no longer assumed to be an interpretative enterprise, and the internal point of view, the one that is of those that practice and use law, is denied whatever epistemic privilege, which is actually the same outcome exclusive legal positivism would claim. For exclusive legal positivism, RAS, the internal point of view, so the point of view of practicing lawyers, has no particular privilege stand in order to understand what the law is. And by saying this, actually, RAS is taking a huge distance from his so-called master, Hart. Hart claims just the opposite, that in order to understand law, there is a privileged point of view, and the privileged point of view is the internal point of view, the point of view of people practicing the law. Raz denies that strongly, radically. And the same point is made by the exclusivist natural lawyer. All right? For a second alternative view, natural law is both epistemically and morally undetermined. Its full legitimacy will result through the procedure adopted in order to know and endorse its own natural law principles. Epistemic access to natural law cannot here do without endorsement. Without endorsement. This implies that natural law has to refer to the positive law and its institutions and conventions to be fully determined and legitimate. It has to include positive law in order to claim legal validity in a concrete case. In this view, conventions indeed are part of the nature of law, because by conventions I endorse and precise what the principles of natural law are. Such openness to positivity makes it also possible for this second version of natural law to take into account the controversial character of the law concept, since it has to admit that law's final prescriptions need and are the outcome of the filter of public discussion and deliberation. Now, as far as legal positivism is concerned, one might argue that its exclusivist version is more coherent and comprehensive as a theory of the concept of law. This can be claimed, but the cost it has to pay is to exclude not only morality, but also the internal point of view. Law for the exclusivist perspective could only be the one that is assessed from the observer's point of view, since the participant could not escape from law's claim of being binding and consequently of having some sort of moral justification. Law is to be addressed through sources that are social facts and as such to be identified through a neutral descriptive attitude. Moral reasoning, it is said. It is possible for a lawyer or an official but according to terms that are not intrinsic to his or her operations. Should it, however, be true that moral reasoning is a part of legal reasoning and just adjudication, the point they make is they don't exclude moral reasoning, Ra's argument. He says, moral reasoning, of course, lawyers use moral reasoning, but moral reasoning is something everyone uses. For instance, cooking, cooking a cake. Of course, we use moral reasoning. For instance, if this cake is, moral reasoning can enter into the cooking of, for instance, it will take ingredients, use ingredients coming from the third world countries, for instance, in order to promote social justice and so on. But cooking as such has nothing to do with moral reasoning. Nevertheless, by cooking, I can exercise moral reasoning. So moral reasoning is, so to say, global reasoning that involves everything, but it's not specific to cooking as it is not specific to lawyering. All right? So there is nothing in moral reasoning, this is Ra's, that is specific for law. We, of course, you have moral reasoning in law, but this is not specific of law. You understand? This is, as it is not specific for cooking. Now, moral reasoning, it is said, is possible for a lawyer or an official, but according to terms that are not intrinsic to his or her operation. Should it, however, be true that moral reasoning is a part of legal reasoning and adjudication, these activities could easily be severed from the more fundamental truth that law is there to be stated in a descriptive mood before using it. This latest conclusion seems to push the exclusivist towards the jurisprudential corner, which in the end is but the depository of irrelevant views for the law practitioner. Nonetheless, exclusive legal positivism has the merit of presenting a quite coherent theory of general jurisprudence. The nature of law is not rooted in a local, parochial context. It can be assessed and conceptualized in universal, somehow categorical terms. Law is conceptually connected only to its being enforceable, while its morality is not an essentially definitional property. Inclusive legal positivism seems to be less coherent. It is too contingent as possible general jurisprudential thesis. Law's connection to morality here is a matter of systemic design. We could or we could not have it, depending on how the legal system is shaped, that is, depending on the contents of the basic rule, the rule of recognition of the system considered. Substantive moral principles, it is said, can count as part of a community binding law in virtue of their status as moral principle, provided the relevant rule of recognition includes a provision of that effect. So the idea is, if moral principles are, there is, in the Constitution, for instance, there are rules that incorporate moral principles, then moral principles are part of the law. This is the idea. But this is contingent. We might have such Constitution, we might not have such Constitution. It is a soft point, insofar as it does not claim the separation between law and morality would hold in any case. Nor that it seems to share the source thesis as a fundamental tenet of positivism. Sources in this view are not generally identified in terms of social facts, since moral rules, if incorporated in a rule of recognition, are said to be acting as sources without, however, being addressed as such as social facts. By this permanent reference to the contingent shape taken by the rule of recognition, however, the inclusivist positivist does not seem to be able to offer a universal definition of the nature of law. This is such that in some cases can receive or count morality among its sources, while, however, being such that in some other different cases it is not able to do the same. The difference here is given through the fact that we can acknowledge, observe, the validity of some moral requirement within the precinct of the basic positive rule. The fundamental question in this approach is that here it is not is that here it is not quite clear which role the law plays when it includes morality, or better, which ontological and normative consequences this fact will bring about. In which sense could we say, within a legal positivistic approach, that morality still itself, that morality maintains its strong normativity once it is made the content of a contingent, positive, discrete prescription of law, which is considered as giving morality its institutional validity? We might suppose that moral strong normativity would be changed into a positive, weak binding force once it is made the content of a positive legal rule. In a sense, you could say, this is controversial, of course, that one difference between principles and rules, and usually, is that the principles have weight and rules have not weight. Okay, and being related to weight, in a sense, principles cannot really be enacted, because weight is not cannot be enacted, cannot be the product of a decision. The weight. We could say the same, perhaps, of strong normativity, strong ought. We couldn't say that strong normativity, we could say that strong normativity is more or less equivalent to weight, and being equivalent to weight cannot be enacted. So once moral principles are enacted in the sense that they are incorporated in the constitutions, they will lose what is their essential character of strong ought. You understand what I mean? So in this sense, if I incorporate moral principle in the Constitution, there will no longer be moral principle. And in this sense, there is no incorporation at all. Is that clear? Okay, anyway. True, law sometimes is seen as a tool to compensate the motivational and cognitive weakness of morality. Still, the source of normativity will, in this perspective, remain within morality itself. Law serves morality, makes it better effective. Morality, however, would remain valid and weakly operative, even if law were not supporting it. Law here is subservient to morality, subservient to it, and draws and it draws its justification and legitimacy from its being able to implement morality. And it is always so, since this relationship is something inherent in the nature of law. The law is there to be used to protect morality. This, however, is not the view of legal positivism, according to which there could be a law, or that there never is a law that is not related to moral standards. One could also argue that once morality is made positive law through its recognition by means of the legal system's basic rule, it will no longer be addressed as morality, but as positive law. Its acknowledgement through the basic rule is a fact, and only this fact will matter in a legal positivistic perspective centering around sources as social facts. Once morality is received in the law, it will be, so to say, consumed, digested, and transformed into something different, a piece of positive law. Lawyers will address no longer morality as such, but a positive prescription. And for a theorist to assess what the law is, there will be no need either to assume an ultra-external point of view. In the end, both inclusive and exclusive legal positivism will point to the same fact, the fact of the recognition through the positive rule, to tell us what is the law and when a proposition of law is true. In both cases, the fundamental standard for legal truth would be the correspondence to social facts. To somehow similar problems is exposed an exclusive natural law theory. Exclusive natural law, like exclusive positivism, cannot integrate all three kinds of point of view, nor could it use the four strategies of definition. In particular, it is exposed to the same criticism of ignoring the internal point of view. This is somehow paradoxical, since natural law usually starts from the assumption of the paradigmatic definition of law taken by lawyers. However, this is only a first move that does quickly to refer to an ultra-external point of view, the one of the absolute good or of the Archimedean moral principle. The latter, then, is considered to be able to counter-secret the internal point of view, that is the deliberative moment within the institutional context in question, and to offer final, discrete decision, at least in sensitive moral issues. Thus, in the definition of the nature of law given by the exclusivist natural lawyer, the deliberative moment, which is to be stressed an essential part of the internal point of view, is not ever present or especially relevant. As a matter of fact, exclusive natural law theories somehow neglect the constitutional moment in the law. Law's constitution is thought as already given in its Archimedean principle. What is more discussed is the moment of application, which is surprisingly seen as sometimes requiring some more or less wide scope of discretion. Now, a way out, and this is my conclusion. As already said, I believe institutionalism, that is a concept of law elaborated in terms of institution, is a possible solution or conciliation to the controversy between natural law and legal positivism. This, I would argue, along two contentions. I would claim first that the more plausible view, and at the same time a way out from the struggle between those two views, is possible given by inclusive natural law. So inclusive natural law is, in a sense, a way out from the controversy between natural law and legal positivism. This being quite close to inclusive legal positivism has nevertheless the advantage of not being referred to systemic contingency. So while inclusive positive law or legal positive cannot be a general theory, inclusive natural law can be a general theory. This being quite close to inclusive legal positive has nevertheless the advantage of not being referred to systemic contingency. Strong normativity is here seen as an essential, not accidental property of law. Strong normativity, on the other side, is argued, cannot do without positive deliberation, both for epistemic and ontological reasons. Inclusive natural law can thus take seriously the fact of the law being laid down in a constructive and conventional positive way. Second, I would argue that an institutional theory of law is the best model for an inclusive natural law. So this is my second step. Inclusive natural law makes deliberation and institutions a fundamental character of law, insofar as morality to be publicly legitimate and valid needs public deliberation and endorsement. In this sense, law's positivity is required and plays a legitimate role not only at the moment of application, but also in that of its constitution. Institution enriches this conclusion insofar as law as institution is considered not just a matter of justification for the public normativity, but is seen as the very being of the legal phenomenon. An institution is that portion of being within which it will make sense to raise issues that need to be handled through moral public deliberation. For an exercise of moral reasoning concerning the public sphere, we first need this public space, and this is more or less equivalent to an institution. This, nonetheless, can be tested through moral criteria and can be challenged accordingly. Normativity in this perspective is somehow a process that follows an inside-outside movement. The internal point of view can never be eschewed, but it will not give the last word about what ought to be done. Thank you.